The sun was setting behind the city skyline, casting a dull orange hue over the bustling streets of Eastwood. The smell of exhaust fumes mixed with the faint aroma of fast food as the heavy hum of traffic echoed across the downtown area. Beneath the towering concrete bridges, on the forgotten side of the city, a young boy named Malik sat on the cold, cracked pavement. His knees were tucked to his chest, his head resting on his arms, staring into the distance. He was only 13, but the weight of the world already seemed to rest heavily on his thin shoulders. His clothes were ragged, worn from too many days spent in the streets, and his dark skin, though naturally beautiful, was weathered by years of hardship. He had lived like this for as long as he could remember, barely scraping by, watching people in their cars and clean clothes rush by without ever giving him a second glance. To them, he was invisible. Why can't we ever have anything nice? Mama, Malik's voice broke the silence, a tremble of desperation hanging in his words. His mother, Donna, paused from sorting through the small collection of plastic bottles she hoped to sell that day. The tired lines on her face deepened as she looked down at her son. Donna was a woman of resilience, always fighting, always surviving, but tonight, for the first time in a long while, she found herself at a loss for words. She couldn't bear to see her son suffer, but she also didn't know how to make it better. The city above them, the world they could never be a part of, was a constant reminder of everything they lacked. And Malik, in his hunger and exhaustion, couldn't understand why they had to live like this. She forced a smile, her voice soft but warm. "One day, baby," she said, brushing a lock of hair from Malik's forehead. "One day, we'll get out of here. We'll have a home, food, clothes, everything we've dreamed of. You just have to wait a little longer." Malik didn't respond. He didn't have the strength to believe her anymore. His stomach growled loudly, a reminder of the empty space inside him. He looked up at the people walking across the bridge above them. To him, they seemed like a different species, people with homes, with enough to eat, people who never went to bed hungry. What was it like to have a life like that? He couldn't even imagine. "What's it like, Mama?" Malik asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's what like?" Donna replied, not sure where this conversation was headed. "What's it like to live like them?" Malik gestured upward, toward the people crossing the bridge, toward a world that was so far out of reach. To have food, to have a home, to not be hungry all the time. Donna froze. For a moment, the question hit her like a ton of bricks. She hadn't thought about what that life would have been like in years. It felt like a distant memory, something she once had, before life had stolen everything from her. She swallowed hard, trying to push back the wave of emotions. "I don't know, Malik, but I know one thing. You're stronger than all of them. You're gonna make it out of here. Baby, I promise." But Malik wasn't so sure. How could he believe that? Every day was the same struggle. Every day, they went to the bridge, hoping someone would notice them, that someone would help, but most of the time, they were ignored, just another invisible part of the city's forgotten population. As night fell, the sounds of the city softened, but the cold of the concrete bridge grew more intense. Malik and Donna curled up in their makeshift shelter, a tangle of old blankets and tarps that barely kept the cold out. Donna lay awake, listening to the sound of her son's breathing. Her mind raced with thoughts of how to change things for them. She couldn't give up, not now, but she didn't have any answers. Only the same empty promises she had whispered to him so many times before. One day, the next morning, the sun rose reluctantly over Eastwood, casting a pale light on the city's crumbling infrastructure. The air was thick with the scent of gasoline and fried food, the usual mix of urban life that filled the streets. Donna woke first, her tired eyes blinking against the weak sunlight filtering through the torn edges of their shelter. The sounds of honking cars and distant chatter filled the air, signaling the start of another day. It was the same routine: wake up, pack up, and head to the bridge. "Time to get up, Malik," Donna said softly, nudging her son awake. He groaned, rubbing his eyes, and sat up with the familiar slow movements of someone who had no energy to spare. They didn't have much, but they still had each other, and that was all that kept Donna going. Malik stretched, his stomach growling louder than before. The previous night's bread had barely filled the emptiness, and now, the pain in his gut seemed unbearable. Donna handed him a slice of stale bread, the last piece of food they had. "Eat this. It'll hold you over," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He took it without a word. chewing it slowly to make it last. As they gathered their things and made their way toward the bridge, the familiar sight of people rushing by without a second glance weighed heavily on Malik's heart. The bridge, with its tall pillars and busy traffic, seemed like a constant reminder of everything they could never reach. The wealth, the comfort, the life beyond their struggles, it was all just a distant dream. Donna went to the side, hoping to sell a few water bottles, her hands shaking from the cold, while Malik took his usual spot along the railing. He held his cardboard sign, "Hungry. Please help." The sign was worn, the edges torn and frayed, but it had become a symbol of his existence. People passed by, some giving him $1 or a spare change, but most ignored him completely. It wasn't just the hunger, it was the feeling of being invisible that hurt the most. "Anything helps, Mom," Malik called out to a woman walking by, but she didn't even look his way. She merely walked past, the sound of her high heels clicking sharply against the pavement, as though he were just a part of the scenery. Frustration bubbled inside him, but he bit his tongue. He'd learned early on that shouting or getting upset only made things worse. Instead, he turned his attention back to the crowd of pedestrians rushing past, their lives so far removed from his own. The hours dragged on, each moment more suffocating than the last. It wasn't until late in the morning that Donna made her first sale, a jogger who bought a water bottle for a crumpled dollar bill. It was hardly enough to get anything to eat, but it was something, and something, in their world, was better than nothing. Malik was barely paying attention when he noticed the sleek black SUV pull up near the edge of the bridge. A family stepped out, and they seemed to embody everything he could never have: wealth, power, and a life of comfort. They looked out of place, like they didn't belong on the same street as him. And for a moment, Malik couldn't take his eyes off them. The man who stepped out of the car was older, using a walker to support his frail frame. His face was marked with years of wisdom, but there was something unsettling about the way he moved so slowly, almost as if every step cost him something. Behind him, a tall, imposing figure, his son, Richard Brooks, walked with a sense of purpose, his sharp suit contrasting with the grimy world Malik knew. And then there was Emily, Richard's teenage daughter, who didn't seem to care about the world around her, her eyes glued to her phone as she rolled her eyes at her father's attempts to engage her. Malik could feel his heart twist with envy. The contrast between them was so stark. How could they live like this, free from worry, while he and his mother had to fight every day just to survive? "Why do they get to have everything?" Malik muttered, not realizing he had spoken aloud. Donna shot him a warning look, but Malik couldn't tear his eyes away. "Don't stare, Malik," she said gently, though she too was quietly observing the family. "You don't know their story." But Malik was sure he did. They had everything: the shiny cars, the nice clothes, the carefree expressions on their faces. They didn't have to beg. They didn't have to struggle. For a moment, he wondered what it would be like to live their life. The family moved closer to the railing, admiring the view of the river below. Howard, the elderly man, leaned on his walker, peering over the edge of the bridge. His son, Richard, was absorbed in his phone, and Emily was fidgeting with something in her hand, clearly uninterested in the moment. Malik couldn't help but feel a surge of anger and jealousy, though he didn't fully understand why. It wasn't their fault. They didn't ask to live like he did, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to their existence. Something that made his own struggles feel even more hopeless. Suddenly, there was a commotion. Malik watched in horror as Howard, the elderly man, clutched his chest, his face twisted in pain, and his frail body swayed dangerously, threatening to tip over the edge of the bridge. The world seemed to slow down around Malik as he watched Howard's hands reach out for the railing, his knees buckling under him. And then, in a split second, Malik did something he never thought he would do. He leapt to his feet, sprinting toward Howard. His bare feet slapped against the pavement as his thin legs pumped furiously, and his heart raced in his chest. Malik didn't think, he just moved. He reached Howard just in time, grabbing hold of his arm before the old man could tumble over the edge. For a moment, it felt like time stood still as Malik pulled with all his might, his small body trembling from the effort. With one final heave, he dragged Howard back from the railing, pulling him onto the pavement where he collapsed. Gasping for air, Richard and Emily were by their side in an instant. Emily dropped to her knees, tears streaking down her face, her hands shaking as she held her grandfather. Richard stood nearby, looking at Malik with a mixture of shock and gratitude. You saved him, Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. You saved my father's life. Malik, still breathless, shrugged. He was about to fall. I couldn't let that happen. As the crowd dispersed, Malik stood there, his heart still pounding in his chest. For once, he didn't feel invisible. For once, someone had seen him, not as a beggar, not as a poor boy, but as a person, as someone who could make a difference. The noise of the city felt muffled now, as if the world had softened in the wake of Malik's impulsive rescue. His heart was still racing, adrenaline coursing through his veins. But something else lingered in the air, a strange mix of pride and disbelief. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel invisible. He had done something important. He had saved a life. Donna arrived moments later, her face a mask of concern, her eyes scanning the crowd, searching for Malik. When she saw him, her face softened, and she quickly moved toward him. Her steps hurried but steady. What happened? She asked, her voice laced with worry as she dropped to her knees beside Malik. She could see the relief in his eyes. But there was something else there too, something deeper. Malik didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced over at Howard, who was now sitting on the pavement, his breathing slowing but still ragged. His son, Richard, was standing close by, speaking softly to Emily, who had her hands on her grandfather's arm. He was about to fall. Malik finally said, I just didn't want him to. Donna's eyes widened as she followed Malik's gaze to the elderly man. Then she looked at Richard, her expression unreadable. She had always told Malik that people with money weren't the ones who would help, that the world would never care about people like them. But Malik had just done something extraordinary. He had shown courage when others would have hesitated. Richard's voice interrupted her thoughts. Thank you. I can't begin to explain how grateful we are, he said, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. You saved my father's life. Donna nodded but didn't speak. She could tell Richard didn't fully understand, didn't grasp the weight of their struggle, but she could see the sincerity in his eyes. He was grateful, no doubt, but Donna had learned long ago that gratitude was often a fleeting thing, easily forgotten when the next problem came along. Richard stepped closer, his eyes now fixed on Malik. I owe you a debt I can never repay, he said, reaching into his pocket. Please, take this. It's the least we can do. Richard pulled out a thick stack of bills and extended them toward Malik, his hand shaking slightly, but Malik didn't reach out. Instead, he looked up at Donna, waiting for her to make a decision. Donna hesitated. Her first instinct was to take the money. It would change everything for them: food, a place to sleep, a chance to escape this life. But something stopped her. No, she said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension in the air. We didn't do this for money. Richard looked taken aback, his brow furrowing slightly. I understand if you don't want to accept a reward, but what you did today, it was incredible. Donna stepped forward, her eyes meeting Richard's. We didn't do it for any reward, she said again, her voice steady. What my son did today, he did because it was the right thing to do, not because we expected something in return. For a moment, there was silence. Richard glanced at his father, who was still breathing heavily but stable now, and then back at Donna and Malik. There was something in his eyes, a shift. Perhaps, a recognition of something deeper. He stepped back, nodding slowly. I understand, he said quietly, but please, let me do something for you. Anything. I don't know how to repay you for what you've done. Malik, who had been quiet for most of the exchange, suddenly spoke up. You don't need to repay me, he said, his voice soft but certain. I just didn't want him to fall. Richard blinked, taken aback by the simplicity of Malik's words. For a moment, it felt like everything had stopped. And in that moment, Richard made a decision. Okay, he said, after a long pause. I'll respect that, but if you ever change your mind, or if you ever need anything, please don't hesitate to ask. Donna nodded, though her mind was already racing. She wasn't sure what she felt about all of this, about Richard's offer, about his gratitude. She didn't trust the world, not the way it had treated them for so long. But something about this encounter felt different. Maybe there was hope. After all, the next few days passed in a blur. They went back to their routine beneath the bridge. But Malik's thoughts were elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about the family he had helped. He couldn't stop wondering about Richard, and Howard, and Emily. They had wealth. Yes, but did they have happiness? Did they have purpose? One afternoon, just as the sun began to dip low in the sky, Malik was startled by the sight of a black SUV pulling up to the bridge. The vehicle was sleek, its tinted windows reflecting the orange light of the setting sun. The doors opened, and out stepped Richard, Emily, and Howard, followed by a few people in suits whom Malik didn't recognize. Malik felt a sudden surge of unease. What were they doing here? He looked at Donna, who was standing near the edge of the bridge, her eyes scanning the crowd for potential customers. She hadn't noticed them yet. Richard spotted Malik first, his eyes widening slightly as he walked toward him. Emily was by his side, looking curiously at the young boy who had saved her grandfather's life. Malik, right, Richard said as he approached, a small smile on his face. We didn't get a chance to properly thank you before. I know this is a bit unexpected, but we wanted to do something for you. Malik looked at Donna, who was now watching the group approach with cautious curiosity. Richard stepped closer, pulling a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and handing it to Malik. This is for you, Richard said. We've arranged for something permanent. A place for you and your mother. It's not much, but it's a start. Malik's heart skipped a beat as he looked at the paper. The words on it were almost too much to comprehend. We've arranged for a small apartment for you, Richard continued, fully furnished. And Malik, we've also enrolled you in a local school. You'll have a chance to get an education. No more living on the streets. Malik stared at the paper in disbelief. A home, a school, a future. Could this really be happening? Donna stepped forward, her voice soft. Why? She asked. Why are you doing this? Richard hesitated, his expression thoughtful. I don't know, maybe because you showed me something today that I've never seen before. Maybe because what you did for my father, it's something I'll never forget. Malik looked at Donna, who was still silent, her hand resting on his shoulder. She looked at him, a mixture of emotions crossing her face, hope, disbelief, and something else, fear. This is too much, Donna said finally, shaking her head. We didn't ask for anything. Richard's expression softened. I know, but sometimes things happen for a reason. And I want to make sure you and your son have a chance. A real chance. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The next few days felt like a whirlwind for Malik and Donna. The promise of a new life was almost too much to process. A dream they had dared not even whisper to each other for fear that it would be snatched away. But now, standing at the edge of the bridge where their lives had been nothing more than a fight for survival, they were being handed a future that didn't seem so out of reach. Donna couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Though, the sudden kindness from Richard and his family, the offer of an apartment and the chance for Malik to go to school, it all felt too easy. She had lived through enough disappointments to know that nothing came without a price. But Malik's eyes sparkled with hope in a way Donna hadn't seen in years. For him, this was a dream come true. The day they moved into their new apartment was surreal. The small building was tucked away in a quieter part of Eastwood. A stark contrast to the chaos of the streets they had known. It was clean, simple, but it had everything they needed: a kitchen, a bathroom, a cozy living room, and 2 small bedrooms, one of which was already prepared for Malik, with a bed covered in fresh sheets and a stack of books on the nightstand. For the first time in what felt like forever, Donna allowed herself to feel the warmth of safety. She didn't have to worry about finding a place to sleep each night, or whether Malik would have food to eat. They were starting over, but as Malik explored their new space, his excitement quickly gave way to unease. The small townhouses around them seemed quiet, almost too quiet, and the few neighbors they met on the first day seemed indifferent to their arrival. Malik couldn't help but wonder what they thought of him. Did they know who he was? Did they know he had come from the streets, from a world so far removed from theirs? He felt the weight of their judgment, even if they didn't say anything. Do you think they know? Malik asked his mother as they unpacked their few belongings in the living room. Donna paused, her hands resting on a box of clothes. She had been trying to ignore the unsettling feeling that had crept up on her too. They probably do. People talk, Malik, but that doesn't matter anymore. We're here, and we have a chance to start fresh. Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are. Malik nodded, but the doubt lingered in his mind. He didn't understand why things were suddenly so different, why Richard and his family were willing to help them, or why it all felt like something was about to go wrong. There were too many unanswered questions. The next morning, as Malik got ready for his first day at the new school, he couldn't shake the nervous feeling in his stomach. He had never been to school before. He had always been too busy surviving. But now, he was being handed a chance to escape the life he had known. To leave behind the hunger and the uncertainty. Donna was standing in the kitchen, making him a quick breakfast. "You ready?" she asked, trying to sound upbeat, but her eyes betrayed the worry she was keeping inside. She knew that this new life wasn't going to be as easy as it seemed. Malik wasn't sure if he was ready. He had never been to a school with other kids his age. Kids who had everything: clean clothes, warm homes, a sense of belonging. What if they didn't accept him? What if they saw him as nothing more than the boy from the streets? "You'll be fine," Donna said, as if reading his thoughts. "Just be yourself. You've been through so much already. This is your chance to show them who you are." Malik nodded, but the fear gnawed at him. He didn't know what he was walking into. But he couldn't back out now. His future was on the line. At school, things were exactly as Malik had feared. The whispers started the moment he walked through the door. His worn-out shoes and tattered clothes an immediate giveaway. The other kids stared at him. Some with curiosity, others with disdain. Malik could feel the eyes on him, could hear the soft murmurs behind his back as he made his way to his seat. A boy named Jake, with a smug expression on his face, leaned over and whispered loudly enough for Malik to hear. "Hey, you're that kid, right? The one who saved that old man on the bridge. What, now you think you're some kind of hero or something?" Malik felt the heat rise to his cheeks. But he didn't say anything. He didn't know how to respond. All he had done was pull a man back from the edge. That was it. But to Jake and the others, it seemed like something to mock. By lunch, the whispers had turned into full-blown gossip. Malik couldn't escape it. Everywhere he went, there were eyes on him, and he could feel the judgment in the air. The other kids didn't understand him, didn't see him for who he really was. They only saw the story they had created in their minds. At the end of the day, Malik was exhausted, physically and emotionally. He didn't want to go back to that place again, but he knew he had no choice. He had to stick it out. For his mother, for the chance at a new life. That evening, as Malik walked home with his head down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As he rounded the corner to their new apartment, he saw a familiar face standing by the door, Emily Brooks, Richard's daughter. "Hey," Emily said, smiling warmly. "How was school?" Malik shrugged. "Same as I expected," he replied. "Just a bunch of people who don't know anything about me." Emily frowned slightly. "You don't have to listen to them. They're just kids. They don't understand what you've been through." Malik gave her a small, forced smile. "Thanks, but it's not easy." "I know," Emily said, her voice softening. "Look, I brought you something." She handed him a small bag of snacks. A gesture of kindness that Malik hadn't expected. "You're not alone in this." "Okay." Malik took the bag, his heart lightening just a little. Maybe there was some good in this new world after all. But as he stepped into the apartment, Donna's face was tense, her eyes scanning the room as if something was wrong. "Malik, come here," she called, her voice urgent. Malik walked over, and Donna handed him a folded piece of paper. It was a note, and it was addressed to them. "Go back to where you came from." The message was short, the handwriting jagged and harsh. Donna's face hardened as she looked at Malik. "I knew this wasn't going to be easy," she said, her voice low. "There are people who won't accept us. Malik, they don't want us here." Malik's stomach dropped as the weight of the words settled in. They weren't welcome here. The whispers had already begun. And this was just the beginning. The days that followed the discovery of the note felt like they had stretched into months. The new apartment, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. Malik couldn't shake the fear that clung to him like a shadow. And Donna was doing everything she could to keep him safe. But the weight of the hostility in the air was undeniable. The note had been a warning, a symbol of the ugliness that still festered just below the surface of their new life. "Go back to where you came from." The words were simple but potent, the handwriting angry and filled with a deep, unrelenting hatred. Donna had torn the note into pieces. But the damage had already been done. They were not wanted here. Everywhere Malik went, he felt eyes on him. The students at school were no better than the adults in the neighborhood. He couldn't escape the whispers, the taunts, the constant reminders that he didn't belong. Jake, the boy who had mocked him on his first day, had become his personal tormentor. following him through the halls, throwing insults at him whenever he could. "Hey, bridge boy," Jake had sneered one afternoon in the cafeteria. "Better watch out. People might think you're still trying to get a handout. Maybe you'll try to save someone else for more free stuff." The laughter that followed sent a wave of heat rushing to Malik's cheeks. He wanted to lash out, to fight back, but he had learned the hard way that doing so only made things worse. He kept his head down, his eyes focused on his tray of food, his fingers clutching the edges of his lunch like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. At home, the atmosphere was no better. Donna tried to keep things normal, to shield Malik from the stress that had begun to consume her. She spent her days at a local community center, trying to make ends meet by offering help to others who were struggling like they had. But when she came home at night, she could see the toll it was taking on Malik. The weight of the judgment, the fear of rejection, it was slowly wearing him down. One evening, after a long day at school, Malik returned to find Donna sitting at the kitchen table, her face drawn with exhaustion. The air in the apartment felt thick, suffocating. Malik hesitated before walking over to her. "Mom," he said softly, "what if we don't belong here? What if we're just a mistake?" Donna looked up at him, her dark eyes weary but filled with love. She had spent years protecting Malik, shielding him from the worst the world had to offer, but she had never been able to protect him from the cruelty of others. "Listen to me, Malik," she said, her voice firm, despite the uncertainty in her eyes. "We belong here just as much as anyone else. No one can take that away from you. No one can tell you that you don't have the right to be happy, to have a future. We've fought too hard for this. Don't let them win." Malik swallowed, but the doubt still lingered. "But it's so hard. The whispers, the stares, they make me feel like I'm not supposed to be here." Donna stood up and pulled him into a tight hug. "I know, baby, I know, but we've come too far to let anything, tear us apart now. What you did for Howard Brooks, what you've done every day to survive, that's what matters. That's who you are, not the way people look at you." Malik closed his eyes, trying to hold on to the strength of his mother's words. But as the days passed, it only got harder. The neighborhood, which had once felt so welcoming, was now a battleground. Every step they took outside the apartment seemed to draw more attention, more judgment. The whispers grew louder, and Donna could feel the pressure building. She wasn't sure how much longer she could protect Malik from the storm that was coming. It wasn't long before it escalated. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, a loud bang echoed through the apartment. Donna froze, her heart skipping a beat. She ran to the window and peered outside, her breath catching in her throat when she saw what was happening. A crowd had gathered at the base of the building. Some of them were shouting, others holding up signs with hateful messages. The words on the signs were clear, painted in large, angry letters: "Go back to where you came from. No freeloaders allowed." The chants echoed through the streets, drowning out the normal sounds of the city. Malik stood frozen in the middle of the room, staring out the window in disbelief. He could hear the shouts, the threats, the anger rising from the crowd like a tidal wave. Donna's hands trembled as she dialed Richard's number, her voice barely audible over the chaos outside. "Richard, something's happening. They're outside, yelling, threatening us." Richard's voice crackled through the phone. "Stay inside. Donna, don't open the door. I'm sending someone over right now. The police are on their way, but it might take a few minutes." Malik walked over to Donna, his face pale. "Are they going to hurt us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Donna didn't know how to answer. She didn't want to lie to him, but she didn't want to scare him either. "No one's going to hurt us," she said, though her heart wasn't so sure. "I won't let them." The next few minutes felt like hours. The banging on the door grew louder, more frantic. The air in the apartment felt thick with fear. Every noise seemed amplified, every moment stretched out in a tense, suffocating silence. And then, just as things seemed on the verge of falling apart, the police arrived. The officers, their uniforms stark against the dimming light of the evening, quickly dispersed the crowd. The shouts slowly faded into murmurs as the mob was broken up. But the damage had already been done. Donna collapsed onto the couch, her body shaking with the aftermath of the ordeal. Malik sat beside her, his head resting on her shoulder, but the fear hadn't left his eyes. That night, Richard called. "Are you two okay?" His voice was tight, his concern evident. "We're fine," Donna said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. But this is only getting worse. Richard was quiet for a moment before responding. We're going to get through this. I promise. We won't let them tear you down. If you need to leave, we can help, but you don't have to face this alone. Donna looked at Malik, who had finally closed his eyes in exhaustion, and she felt the weight of everything that had happened. The fight wasn't over, the storm was far from over, but they had each other, and they had the strength to keep moving forward. Thank you, Richard, Donna said softly, but we're not going anywhere. We're staying.